Today, I want to cover 5 nations, or builds to be more specific, in EU4 that get pretty much no attention, and hence the claim that no one has played these. As always, I'm sure there will be one person who has played these and will proceed to comment, Lemon Cake confirmed, liar, he should uninstall EU4, but outside of that, I hope I can interest you in at least one of these 5 nations and or builds, as it were. They're sorted vaguely in increasing obscurity and relevancy order, although certainly some of the later entries are less obscure, however more relatively obscure, if that makes sense. But with all that said, I do believe it is better to show you rather than tell you, so let's jump into the game and get to that. But before we do, a like would be appreciated if you haven't already, and a subscription would be amazing. But honestly, enough self-shitting, let's get to the first entry on our list. Number 1 on our list is going to be the Kingdom of Ajuran, off in the corner of the Horn of Africa. If there is ever a nation that is basically neglected or ignored due to more interesting neighbours around it, while still having good content on it, I believe Ajuran is an excellent go-to example. The Racids in Arabia, Oman, Hormuz, and Ethiopia all dominate north of it in terms of interesting nations and powerful nations. Ethiopia, with their Aksum path, is a very powerful and interesting nation to play. The Racids with early Arabia are also interesting and, well, a powerful nation to play. Oman has access to one of the largest single trade steering modifiers in the game, and Hormuz is a trade boy that also does quite well. Basically, a lot of these nations are famous in their own right, because of their modifiers and their unique way of approaching the game. Sure, the problem with Ajuran is that even south of it you have Kilwa, which plays a relatively similar game but is just stronger than Ajuran, and I think that's the reality that anyone playing Ajuran is going to discover. A lot of the similar steps in terms of the actual on-screen experience, Kilwa just kind of tends to do better. But what do you get for, well, playing as Ajuran? I think in terms of uniqueness and roleplay potential, they have one of the most neglected and yet interesting mission trees in the game. I mean, you literally have an event where you give a giraffe to the Emperor of Heaven. Like, come on, giving a giraffe to the Chinese. And while the mission tree doesn't include anything ridiculously broken, there's a bit of a meme that you can play into, as well as just have a unique time playing the game. What do I mean by this? Well, first of all, you have a relatively unique approach to dealing with gold in the area, namely that you're able to approach gold mining diplomatically and do some gold deals with people and sign some temporary bonuses, and then trade with India and kind of build a Southeast Asia trading empire, for lack of a better word, as you go and expand your holdings into the Zanzibar, Zambezi node. Your Gulf of Aden dominance then also naturally leads into your trade expansions and early conquests of India and Southeast Asia. So you have a bit of a colonial game, but not in a usually colonial region. But I think where, again, the uniqueness of the nation and its interest spikes is the retake the Maldives and expand the Navy mission. See, expanding the Navy gives you subjugation on the Maldives, which is fine. It lets you, surprise, surprise, subjugate the Maldives. But retaking the Maldives, once you own them, has a very interesting thing. It gives you an event where the AI, I do believe, do correct me if I'm wrong, has a 100% chance of accepting if it's the player they can choose. And if they choose to accept your diplomatic request, they're going to get themselves integrated to you. And that's interesting because the event straight up integrates them into you, as in gives you full cause on their land, despite their size, meaning that you can go and feed the Maldives like all of India, and then you'll just inherit the nation, which is very strong because there's no upper limit to how big they are when you pop this event. Now, naturally, this event here doesn't do anything because I don't have them as a vassal, which is a bit weird. So they have a backup option and they can never do this event if it's not your vassal. I believe that this is actually the option if you were just to conquer the Maldives and not have them as a vassal. It gives you 50 beach monarch points instead of inheriting them. But I digress. This is a relatively unique mission tree approach from there, and you can certainly cheese it. What gets more interesting with them specifically too is this mission here for hydraulic expertise. It requires you to fortify your capital and then go and, do some buildings, do some dev clicks, and when you go and do some buildings and build some dev clicks, you can enable the Merchant Guild's privilege hydraulic rights. The way that privilege works is that areas that suffer with water lack of, so for example the steppes that have plus 20% dev cost, is going to halve the dev cost on steppes, coastal deserts and deserts. So you get minus 10% dev cost on the desert here, but if you had a coastal desert like this province here, it's going to decrease it by 17.5%. Let me actually demonstrate it. Right, I've done the setup and also taken the province for the demonstration. If we go ahead and enable this mission to enable hydraulic rights, in our merchant estate burghers here, we can go ahead and give them the hydraulic rights in question, and we're going to get our dev cost reductions. So as you can see, this coastal desert was plus 35, and it's reduced by 17.5%. This privilege actually makes deserts and steppes not bad lands to exist in, like at all. For example, this is the same dev cost as deving highlands, which isn't great, but it's not the worst at all. And if you are wanting to do a tall-ish campaign and tall core, this is pretty good for you, as yes, you have some farmlands here for excellent development potential, especially inside your subject. Actually, there's a steppe, but you get the point. You have a lot of steppe and then deserts that can definitely benefit from this bonus. Finally, in terms of uniqueness, you also have access to a somewhat unique Somalian theocracy government reform, which gives you access to ICTA and royal marriages, as well as giving you some relatively unique modifiers like trade efficiency, missionary strength, and a monodiplomatic skill. Neat stuff. Nothing here is inherently broken or fundamentally overpowered unless you really, really want to abuse the Retake the Maltese mission to gain a whole bunch of free cores, if that's how you want to play the game. Outside of that, they present a very unique campaign and a very unique approach of, well, a colonial campaign in Southeast Asia that doesn't actually involve colonizing the New World as well. In terms of pure power, I still believe Kilwa is just stronger than them, and Zanzibar has a lot of stuff in the south as well. Meanwhile, Ethiopia, the Rassids into Arabia, or Oman and Hormuz also just do quite well compared to them. So I think that's one of the reasons they're not talked about. But if you haven't given Ajuran campaign a playthrough, then certainly a recommendation from me. But with that all said, we move on to the next entry on our list. For this, you want to go ahead and play any nation inside the Franconian culture group. You could also change your primary culture to Franconian, but I actually recommend for the full LARP and longevity of the campaign that you pick one of the small people inside this hiding right in the middle of Germany culture group. Now, Franconia is a very interesting nation in the sense that it is the definition of overshadowed by its peers. Bavaria is right next to it, Austria is famous in its own right, Bohemia is right next to it, north of it, Germany is dominated by Prussia and Prussia campaigns, Lübeck dominates the trade setups here, and Cologne and Westphalia dominates, well, super Western Germany, if that makes any sense. Switzerland dominates the Switzerland area and tends to expand into this area, and if you are playing someone somewhat within this area as well, you tend to do Platinate campaigns if you are even playing in that area. In essence, all the way around you, you have much more famous nations, nations that tend to just treat you as an expansion area. And as such, Franconia, for me, as an area, is probably one of the least played, I would say, in Germany. And that's not to say that that's because there's some hidden mission tree that's super amazing here. It's unique, sure, but I definitely think it's more of a campaign as a whole that you have to approach for this. I'd also say if you've never played a free city before, this will be your opportunity. I would suggest either Nuremberg if you're new to free cities and want to try free city into expansion gameplay, or Rothenburg if you've played free cities before and want a more interesting campaign. Rothenburg also has access to the heretics and heathen provinces do not give any penalties, which can be an interesting way of approaching the religious debate in Germany. Just ignore it. And that can be an option if you want to stick with Rothenburg ideas. However, you want to go ahead and form Franconia for this playthrough. It's not the most difficult formation, however, it's going to involve early expansion in HRE, so nothing relatively trivial, and again, you have a lot of major powers breathing down your neck. So, what do you get for forming Franconia? Well, they don't have an entirely unique mission tree, they have 5 unique missions, 4 of which you technically start with and can be used as your approach to uniting Greater Franconia. Look, it's got some Arab armies and some yearly prestige, a bunch of claims and even more claims, but once you actually do go ahead and unite Franconia, you get access to the Franconian ideas, a relatively deeper green map color and a cool map flag. I think it looks cool, as well as, of course, Franconian ideas. So, what's this final mission, the Kingdom of the Franks? Well, you are Franconia. The Frankish claims are in your name, so it's a relatively interesting roleplay campaign, I would argue, to go ahead and fight France, a relatively big meanie certainly by this point as well, and just crush them and go and establish your Kingdom of Franconia. It gives you a relatively, should we say, mid to late game challenge to partake in that, and given the relative lack of wealth inside the Germany area, as well as all the people around you being HRE, so expansion is hard, campaign that's somewhat unique. It's not like this is super overpowered if you do win it. A whole dip relations +1, whoa, and a monthly spender point, as well as a permanent claim on France. Oh, slow down here, Paradox, you're making it a bit too overpowered. But I don't think you're playing it for the bonuses, you're playing it for the uniqueness of the campaign, and hence that's my recommendation. Otherwise, you can go and enjoy relatively similar to default mission trees. You do get some extra stuff here, like local dev costs and reform progress growth, as well as a claim on Brandenburg, which can give you CCR and AE impact for 30 years. That's not something I'll complain about. As well as the HRE General Become Emperor path, if you want to follow that path. But that's neither here nor there. I mean, the Year Republican tradition can be very good, because again, you're usually doing this as a republic if you're starting as a free city. But I digress. What do you get as your Franconia ideas? They're not awful, but they're not something to bring home about. It's a cavalry, old European cavalry LARP nation. There's actually going to be one extra one of these kind of coming up, so you can roleplay as having your infantry and peasant armies supported by your corps of knights. You get 5% discipline on the finisher, and 20 national manpower, 10% A reduction, which is very helpful in Germany. You get some Year Republican tradition or legitimacy if you want to play that way, some trade bonuses, some fort defense, some cavalry combat ability, nothing to scoff at here. This is your knight roleplay. You get some production efficiency, some dev cost here, and some Yearly prestige. Are these amazing? Absolutely not. Anything to call home about? Not really. But I think that's kind of the pitch of Franconia. It's nothing too special. It's the uniqueness of the campaign that no one really plays in this area that makes it something that stands out. And hey, there are actually things to do. To roleplay as Franconia, a Germanic France, if you will, and you can go ahead and crush France and relive those claims. But that's really all I have to say about Franconia. So now let's move on to number 3 on our list, which is going to be a campaign involving our good friends, the Uzbeks. Probably one of the strongest hordes, and don't worry, they don't start this big. I did just integrate the tag over here, namely Transoxiana, into them for the setup. But one of the more powerful hordes by day 1. They're not as strong as Oirat, and Oirat has a very natural expansion into China, hence that's why they're not really played. And obviously Great Horde has the whole Golden Horde as well, restoration mechanics that make it unique. However, the Uzbeks still enjoy access to the default Horde mission tree, which is quite extensive. But the part that I would like to suggest here is, usually when it comes to the steppes being tamed by the hordes, as it were, taming the steppes, singularity of the hordes, those kind of campaigns tend to be played by nations like Muscovy that conquer the hordes and aren't really a case of the steppe hordes themselves settling down into a civilized society, but more of an outside civilized society taming the steppe. If we want to roleplay a campaign as the horde stepmen themselves settling down into a society, and then, taming themselves, uniting their horde brethren under one kind of horde but civilized approach, then I would recommend the Uzbeks going ahead to form, Bukhara. Now, for that, you'll need to embrace feudalism, representing your movement towards that of a settled people. You need to own Bukhara and not be the overlord of Sibir, which is a really, really specific requirement, not to have a vassal called Sibir. I'm not sure why that's there. I don't know how many times it's ever come up, but you know what? It's an option. So when it comes to that, you do need to, embrace feudalism. Shouldn't be the biggest hurdle as well, which is why I've spawned a knight, so I can do that immediately. And once you embrace feudalism, you can go ahead and form Bukhara. I would also recommend here making sure you take new traditions and ambitions to represent your people. You still have access to these horde mission trees, so you can kind of roleplay as your horde approaching the horde reconquest steps, but as always, you are now the settled people. You immediately become an Iktar government reform, and so you will lose access to the tribes and gain normal estates. But in return for that, you also get Bukharan ideas, which were recently buffed and are actually really strong now. Coming in with 10% dev cost and 20% cavalry combat ability, you are very still good at fighting with horses. Not as amazing as the hordes naturally, but still got the bonuses. And that's kind of to reflect your horde past. You pick up 20% CCR as well as some legitimacy bonuses here. Some institutional spread and piety accelerator, can't complain. Tech cost, maximum tolerance of heathens, can't complain. And a massive 25% fort maintenance, which is actually pretty strong once you realize that it can combine with the final idea for minus 50% construction cost. You do get some unrest and tolerance of true faith here, for example. To become a wide fort build, normally fort builds are very, okay, I want to buff my forts, make each individual fort have loads of fort defense, and so on and so forth. With Bukhara, once you're taming the steppes, because you have access to both minus 15% construction cost and minus 25% fort maintenance, if you really want to stack fort maintenance reductions by, for example, taking something like infrastructure ideas, which has another minus 25% fort maintenance and minus 10% construction cost, your forts won't be good, but you're able to afford to put them practically everywhere and cover the steppe in forts, which will make you pretty uninvadable as well. It's a bit of a different kind of Switzerland approach, namely, the entire country's a fort now, good luck. But it's certainly a unique way of playing. And finally, if that's not quite your path and you want to go on a relatively unique, shall we say, reconquest, Bukhara is also able to enthrone a Timurid prince and then form the Timurids, as well as take that whole path to go form the Mughals, or go form the Mughals directly if you don't want to mess around with the Timmies. So it's a rather interesting campaign. It's got unique ideas that have been recently buffed, and I think it's pretty underrated for what it is. But if you're looking for something that's purely roleplay, LARP, and frankly not really played at all, then I'm going to have to suggest a Northumberland playthrough. Now, what does Northumberland get? Do they get amazing missions? No, they have the default mission trees, but you're not playing them for the mission trees. Northumberland is really a country that sometimes exists, that you pop out of England when you reconquest CBU on England, because they have some cores in Northern England. Otherwise, you practically never see them and you most certainly never play them, which means you probably don't know that Northumberland has access to 3 unique events. The first flavor event, and I did realize they need to be independent for those flavor events to fire, so, if I'm doing this with console commands, obviously I don't pop out independent, I've just released myself. Otherwise, the first flavor event, which again you need to be independent for, is going to be this one, the King in the North. This is going to give you the kingdom rank for free, which is nice, irregardless of your development, which is neat, and hey, it's a bit of a lark thing, because as you may have noticed, this whole event chain of, granted, 3 total events, is a reference to Game of Thrones. Yay. I know that it's not exactly the most popular movie still around, but yeah, if you're a big Game of Thrones enjoyer, give Northumberland a go, as you'll probably pick up the references within these 3 events. After you've crowned yourself as the King in the North, you'll go ahead and get the event, selecting a Northern candidate, relatively afterwards that event. It's not like immediately, but it's not too long of a meantime to fire, and you get a choice. You can either get the Percy dynasty, which historically ruled Northumberland, basically, under England from around the time that William the Conqueror came into England to like the 18th century. So, you know, they've been in Northumberland for quite a while. If you are a, shall we say, York nationalist, then this is probably the pick for you. You can also get the House of York, you can get the Lancasters that send their regards, you can pick your guy that you just start with, you know, remaining on the throne for no effect, or here's a relatively unique thing, you can get a descendant of the Norwegians that were claiming the English throne during the, William the Conqueror days, and get a Halfdan Ragnarsson descendant. And if you do that, you'll get access to the final third flavor event unique to Northumberland, Nordic Claims. This is, after all, starting to sound familiar, but you're going to get a Restoration of Union CP on Norway, which is neat. It's also a bit bugged here. It says it lasts for 304 years. It's not meant to do that. It's meant to last for 10 years. But they messed up the code, so you just get a Restoration of Union for 304 years. Enjoy. Probably sounds abusable. Frankly, I'd like to see someone abuse it, but there you go. Otherwise, what else does Northumberland give you? Well, the ideas aren't great. Much like Franconia, you still have the 10% Old Knights LARP, as well as an attrition for enemies, if you want to use that. A bit hard to use. But where I do find it relatively interesting is I have access to minus 25% cost to fabricate claims. And this is the build I'd like to pitch for Northumberland if you're going to be playing it. I would say you need 3 idea groups to pull it off, and what I would suggest you take is a Northumberland colonial game. I know, me suggesting another colonial game. So grab Exploration, but then go ahead and grab Expansion. You know, if we're going to do a colonial game, we're going to do it well. Followed by Aristocratic, and of course, Espionage. Why? Well, you see, Aristocratic has cost fabricate claims minus 50%. You have minus 25% here, and the Loyalty Act can decrease the cost fabricate claims by a further minus 25%, as well as give you some anti-autonomy reductions. Aristocratic, as well as Expansion, also has access to minus 30% construction cost if you really want to scale your country. So, you know, good policy. You can get some extra global settlers increase for your colonial empire. And there's some cavalry combat ability you can also stack with the Noble Loyalty Act. So, you know, good stuff. This is going to give you a rather impressive 35% cavalry combat ability for just existing, and you know what? That's pretty good for a non-strictly cavalry nation, as well as 60% cavalry ratio, so you can again roleplay as Northumberland with their heavy knights supported by hordes of peasants. Nice. However, as you may have noticed, if we ever want to fabricate a claim, it's stupidly cheap for us. We have around a 120% reduction, which is unfortunately capped. It still doesn't cost us 0 to fabricate claims, but we can also, of course, because of espionage ideas, fabricate entire states, which is very nice. So in essence, if you ever want to be doing an expansion game in the New World or something, and you want to be claiming entire states, or just expanding, inside Britain itself, or wherever you want to go, you're able to claim entire states with this build. Is it strong? Absolutely not. Basically, any other kind of campaign within the England area is just better off forming GB, then it's just objectively better. But if you would like to do a not Great Britain playthrough in the British Isles, which is relatively rare, I mean, even Ireland campaigns end up forming GB, then that'll be my recommendation for you. Just try and avoid the temptation of forming the British or English nation as much as you can. I'd recommend clicking this button, because then otherwise you're just playing a slower English start. Otherwise, indeed, that will be my recommendation for Northumberland. And finally, let's move on to the number 1 spot. And here we are in Karakyunlu, a nation known as the Black Sheep, Akyunlu being the White Sheep. Now, is Karakyunlu super obscure compared to the other nations that I brought up on this list? Absolutely not. But I think that out of every single nation that got updated in King of Kings, they are concerningly underrated given the amount of content and overpowered stuff that they've gotten. A lot of the focus lied on the Byzantibus. Byzantium, of course, getting a new mission tree brought a lot of attention towards them. The Mamluks also finally received an update, and they hadn't had a mission tree or content for absolute ages, and the Mamluks getting missions was quite a big deal since they gained access to getting things like Clover on Cairo. Very good. Arabia stole a lot of the spotlight as well, given that they got missions for Arabia and had a lot of cool stuff there. And of course, the absolute crown and zenith of King of Kings would be the well, Persian missions and Persian restoration. All of that is really cool, but it kind of overshadowed the fact that Karakayunlu got access to a pretty cool mission tree. Is it completely broken? Absolutely not. Compared to even the Mamluks into early Arabia, or frankly Persia, with the absolute win button that is Persia, Karakayunlu does not go anywhere near those nations in terms of their raw strength. But Karakayunlu doesn't exactly start with weak abilities. It's not a weak nation by any stretch of the imagination, starting the game with 161 development, and given the uniqueness of its positioning, with not quite in the, shall we say, Persian Thunderdome, but also within the domain of the Ottomans and Mamluks, Karakayunlu, I believe, is really underrated given the power of itself. And this mission tree is quite extensive and quite fun, including a lot of, shall we say, not great but temporary bonuses that can, inspire you to go ahead with your campaign, a lot of genuinely cool flavor text, as ironic as that sounds, and even the missions that you do have aren't necessarily bad. The Legacy of the Seljuks here, for example, can gain you extra monarch points for your rulers, and can restore some sites, giving you local unrest and mission strength and certain bonuses, as well as a pretty massive minus 20% local construction cost and 10% dev cost for 20 years, which is very good for scaling. Repopulating Iran, for example, can give you extra bonus tax development and dev cost modifiers, as well as manpower and same culture group, which is very nice. Gunpowder Empires can buff your artillery, well, mainly by making it cheap and giving 10% fire damage. You have a lot of stuff like that, nothing that it really is there to call home about, but is quite strong. Ironically, I believe the most powerful thing you can actually get is the Augur's Homeland, which not only gives you access to the Tribes Estate, a pretty underrated bonus, I would argue, as the tribes have some pretty strong bonuses, like if you make them loyal, minus 20% cavalry cost, but also a permanent 25% cavalry to infantry ratio, and 0.25 cavalry shock. Now, if you're building around cavalry shock or cavalry fire pips, nations like Finland, Scandinavia, or even Siam are going to be better, but this is not exactly a weak bonus either, and is something that I would certainly recommend. You can also gain access to a 50%, I'm not kidding, 50% goods produced bonus to Tabriz. And while Tabriz is a mountainous province, and hence not great for development, it already starts with 7 diplomatic dev clicks placed for you, as well as silk, an excellent trade good, and a center of trade. So 50% goods produced on Tabriz is an amazing bonus, one that can only commend. Karakayunlu is also an excellent nation if you wish to form Arabia afterwards and do a full-on cav build, or an alternative for forming Persia. So complete these missions and then do a cavalry build Persia. Your ideas, though, are again absolutely nothing to scoff at, having Land Leader Shock and Land Leader Fire inside your ideas for great generals, as well as some Land Leader Maneuver pips. You're second only to Oda. You have 20% cavalry combat ability, an excellent bonus, 25% manpower bonus, a 10% CCR and 5% province war score bonus. Shame that there are small numbers here, otherwise this is basically the greatest idea ever. It has the 2 best bonuses you care about. Some tolerance of heretics, this is quite filler. Limited design subjects, filler. Unrest, filler, and some, well, taxes, so not the best idea set ever, but nothing to complain about. I think Karakayunlu is criminally underrated, and mainly because of all the powerful nations around them. However, if you haven't given QQ a game, you absolutely should. With that said, though, that is all the time I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching, with a special thank you to all my channel members, especially Ark, Stola, W Haste, Slemon, Style72, Lord Zendikar, Nick Fassbender, Manhattan, Nick Huss, The Awesome Rabbit, Best Pro Gaming, Grandma Flavia, Connor, Andre Zalberg, Decky, Sov, Mobkiller, Anthony35, AC Napo, Glorious Leader, Xerxes, Mr. Kumshok, Yukata, Danray, Arthur Tan, Jack, and Marvi.